Welcome to this extended gaming review of the MSI Katana B12, including the brand new NVIDIA RTX 4050 with 6GB of VRAM, and in this case a theoretical maximum wattage of 105 watt, which in reality doesn't really go above 85 watt. And that is why I've decided to call it a 85 watt version actually. Okay, so if you're interested in a detailed review of this laptop, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as I will publish a full review of it in a few days. I will also post a link in the description. Before we take a look at its performance in 22 games, I have to point out that I have a concern to make. Despite the high average FPS this laptop and the RTX 4050 seem to have in all games, the frame times often, not always, weren't looking good, and the 1% low often went way below what you would expect from such a laptop. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is either driver related, so it might be fixed soon, or if it is laptop related and MSI has to fix the laptop's BIOS or something. Though the boost clocks of the RTX 4050 and the built-in Intel i7 looked really good and I didn't experience throttling at all. Or if this is a problem of the ridiculously small memory bus of only 96-bit the RTX 4050 Mobile has to live with, whereas the RTX 4060 and even the 4070 also only have 128-bit. Even the RTX 3050 had a bigger bus with also 128-bit, and the RTX 3060 even had 192-bit. So if this sneaky downgrade that Nvidia doesn't want you to know about would actually be the issue, then I guess the shit would hit the fan for them. Feel free to let me know your thoughts about that in the comments and share your experience with these cards if you have the chance to test them. But now let's just start with the benchmarks. Please note that all tests have been made at 1080p. If you're interested in some 4040p benchmarks as well, please check out this video afterwards, where I compare the 1080p and the 4040p performance in some games. Up front, it can handle 1440p, or also called WQHD, pretty well to some extent. Okay, now the very first title for today was A Plague Tale Requiem, and on high settings using the new frame generation feature, I saw a high average of 84 FPS and a pretty low 1% low FPS of only 25. Now this might be the perfect example of what I was talking before. High average FPS but still stuttering and a semi-good gaming experience. You can see that if you take a look at the frame time curve over here. In an optimal situation, this should be as flat as possible. These long vertical lines here represent small microstutters that you can actually feel when watching the footage closely. Apex Legends ran pretty well though, without annoying stutters on high settings, with a perfectly fine 143 FPS on average and a solid 1% low of 63 FPS. Most certainly one of the best running games of this video, as you will see in a bit. It's safe to say that the game is perfectly playable that way, and you could of course get some more FPS and cap them for a more fluid gameplay by using medium or even lower settings. I really suck at this game, so please forgive me when watching my gameplay gives you a headache. It's the same kind of headache I get when watching Donald Trump trying to speak a straight sentence, so next game. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I saw an average of 92 FPS using the high settings with an acceptable 1% low of 46 FPS. It wasn't fluid 100%, but absolutely playable. Despite the successful completion of the benchmark with very high or ultra settings, actually using them in-game seemed to cause problems with the VRAM size, so I went for high settings just to be sure. Which actually reinforces my suspicion about the small memory bus. Maybe the 6GB VRAM aren't managed as well because of that. Again, if you have inside info or technical knowledge about that, you're welcome to post it in the comments. The brand new Atomic Heart actually ran really well on ultra settings, looking really great, with or even without activated frame generation. Without frame generation, I saw an average of 110 and a 1% low of around 42. And with activated frame generation, I saw an average of 172 FPS and a 1% low of 52. The stutters were very seldom, and I personally would still call it a decent gaming experience. In Call of Duty Warzone, I was actually using ultra settings with high texture quality and DLSS in quality settings and saw an average of 111 FPS and a 1% low of 47. You could surely reach 144 Hz stable if you would be okay with lowering the settings. As you can see here, there were some stutters though, especially in the beginning of a match. That might get better over time after playing some matches. Because I know some of you will want to know, I also added CSGO, of course. The relatively low 1% FPS of only 70 are actually a CSGO issue and you won't notice them at all. It was perfectly playable with an average of around 250 FPS. So let's get right to the next game. In Cyberpunk 2077 I was able to actually use the Ultra preset thanks to frame generation. This resulted in 84 FPS on average and a 1% low of 33 FPS with deactivated DLSS, that is, and deactivated ray tracing. As you can see here, it is playable, and the relatively low 1% low are actually an issue on many systems with this title, so it's kinda hard to solely blame the laptop or the RTX 4050 for it. In Elden Ring, I was using the maximum settings and saw an average of 60 FPS, which is coincidentally the FPS cap this game has if you are not trying to get around that using mods. The 1% low was relatively high with 41 FPS, so I guess you won't be able to blame the laptop if you're going to die and die and die and die again, and I guess you know. Okay, so next. Far Cry 6 ran perfectly fine with 106 FPS on average and a high 1% low of 70 FPS using the Ultra settings. In fact, this game provided one of the best experiences I had while recording these games. In Fortnite, I saw a high average FPS of 156 on high settings with DLSS quality, but that resulted in a lower 1% low of 48 FPS. I mean, it's playable, but you might certainly notice some stutters here and there. Let's just hope that Nvidia or MSI can fix this with driver or BIOS updates. Forza Horizon 5 was actually kind of unplayable at high settings and deactivated DLSS. I did experience a very choppy gameplay despite the high average of 132 FPS with a bad 1% low of 37 FPS. But I have to add that all MSI laptops I'm testing right now are having that issue with Forza 5, even the one with the RTX 4060 and the one with the lower powered RTX 4050 45 watt as well. So that actually could be an issue with the hardware which is related to MSI. Well, sometimes laptop testing can actually be really frustrating, to be honest. The experience in God of War was alright with an average of 93 FPS on high settings with DLSS in quality mode, despite the 38 FPS 1% low and a slightly fluctuating frame time graph. I actually didn't notice the unstable frame time graph or the unstable frame times, to be honest, and I kinda enjoyed playing the game this way. With Half-Life Alyx, I actually also managed to test a VR game on the MSI Katana using the RTX 4050 mobile, but I had to use the low settings, which looked just as good as the high settings, to be honest, and I had to lower the resolution of my Oculus Quest 1 via the Steam VR menu to about 70% in order to achieve playable results due to the small 6GB VRAM. This way I achieved an average of 71 FPS while my Quest caps the FPS at 72 FPS anyway, so it was almost perfectly stable. 1% low were 36 FPS. I experienced some stuttering, but overall I would still consider it enjoyable. PS, here is some footage for which I didn't lower the resolution. In short, it was kinda unplayable that way. Hogwarts Legacy was another game in which the frame times weren't as good as I would have liked them to be. On medium settings with activated frame generation I saw a very high average of 117 FPS on average, but a very low 1% low of only 30 FPS. And as you can see, it is of course playable, but you will experience some stutter once in a while. Which in this case could also be the game's fault as well, because it has issues on so many systems right now. Maybe they'll fix that in a patch or so. Using the high preset with frame generation and DLSS in quality mode, Microsoft's Flight Simulator worked perfectly fine with an average FPS of 92 FPS and a 1% low of 43 FPS. Frame generation is a real game changer, as this title struggles to produce high FPS on pre-RTX 4000 series cards. By the way, in all the time I was benchmarking these games on the MSI Katana using the RTX 4050, I never saw a broken frame or artifacts when using frame generation. I have to admit that I'm a big fan of this tech and I really like it. I was actually testing Minecraft using ray tracing, as this is one of the few titles that would be able to do so using the RTX 4050, and the benefit is clearly visible for everyone at first sight. So using the high settings with activated RTX and 8 chunks visibility, I saw an average of somewhere between 60 and 67 FPS and a 1% low of around 30 FPS. For Overwatch 2 I was using the high preset with 100% resolution, which resulted in an average of 200 FPS and a 1% low of 76 FPS. It would be perfectly fine to play this game professionally on this machine, I guess. So next. Playing PUBG on ultra settings resulted in an average of around 93 FPS and a 1% low of 46 FPS. On high settings I was getting an average of 117 and a 1% low of 50 FPS. Overall the experience seemed to be very smooth, and I just noticed that this game is almost 6 years old by now. Oh Jesus, how time flies by. Well, I also decided to test Portal with activated ray tracing, as this is another title in which you can clearly see the difference visually. But at first the game was a stuttery mess, even with DLSS quality and frame generation, so I had to choose DLSS in ultra performance mode, which finally resulted in playable frame times and a high FPS of 106 on average and a 1% low of 40 FPS. Since it's a single player game without enemies, I guess it's still playable very well, even with a few hiccups here and there. And you'll have to admit that it just does look better with RTX on. In Red Dead Redemption 2 I was having problems with stuttering once more. The average FPS were really okay with 83 FPS on high settings using DLSS quality, but the 1% low of 25 FPS indicated that I was getting a lot of micro stuttering, or actually real stuttering, as you can see in the footage. For me this was actually at the brink of being unplayable, as it really annoys me if a game is that unstable. Again, I really hope they'll manage to fix this. I mean, either MSI or Nvidia. The Witcher 3 Next Scan version ran with an average of 81 FPS on ultra settings using DLSS quality and frame generation. I'm just not a big fan of the new DirectX 12 implementation and would probably prefer to play the game on the old DirectX 11 for much better frame rates at the same visual output. So if you're planning to do so, make sure you're using the DirectX 11 version, unless you are planning to activate ray tracing, of course. And yeah, last but not least, I added Valorant into my benchmark run, because I know some of you would probably shed a tear if I didn't. And I'm happy to tell you that I saw one of the highest frame rates in this game I ever experienced on the laptop, with an average of 331 FPS on high settings, average, and a 1% low of 152 FPS. It is more than perfectly playable, so enjoy your fragging. So that was actually all for today. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to hit like and or subscribe to the channel, especially if you would like a similar video for the RTX 4060 mobile, which I'm planning to do soon. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.